Hey there. Welcome back. Today we are going to do some ASMR with books. I love book ASMR, and several of you have said that you enjoy these kinds of videos too. And sometimes I think a little too hard about it and feel like I have to prepare some sort of formal book review, book report for you. Old tendencies of mine towards perfectionism and rigidity and structure. So today I decided to just pick up a few books and talk to you about them. And this is partially a tribute to a video I did way back when I first started my channel, before I had a mic or anything, and I talked about some of these same books in that video. And the reason I come back to these is because these are my comfort books, is what I would call them. And they're books that I just come back to and read again and again. Books, some of them, that I first read when I was much younger. And, when you're feeling crummy, like if you're sick or you just don't have much energy and you just need comfort food in book form, these books do that for me. So the first book I have here, which I've been tapping on, just some lovely classic paperback tapping here. This one does have kind of a vinyl cover over it, so it has that nice sticky sound. And this is Midnight Hour Encores by Bruce Brooks. And this is a young adult novel from the 90's, which I read when I was a teenager in the 90's. And it is the story of a young woman named Sibilance, and she is a cello prodigy in this fictitious universe. She is among the top 5 cello players in the world, and she is 16 when this book takes place, and this is a story about her relationship with her father, who has raised her, and her relationship with her mother, who she has been estranged from for most of her life, and her path as an artist, and what she wants to do with her music. And it's just a wonderful story. Bruce Brooks wrote a lot of young adult novels in that time period, and I read a few others, but this is the one that always stuck with me, and so I always have held on to a copy of it. And like I said, I first read it in high school. I was part of a nerdy group of kids who had a book club at lunchtime, and so we would go eat our lunch in the library and talk about books, which was great. And I'm always very thankful to my high school librarian, Mrs. Rowan, for allowing us that refuge from, like the crazy cafeteria zoo. So anyway, I digress, but this book affected me a lot when I first read it, and I think the thing I love about it is that it's such a story about music, because there is a lot about classical music in it, because that is what she is playing, and that is her world. And then a big crux of the story is her learning about her mother and father's story, and that took place in the 1960s, and so there's also a lot of music of the 60s in this book, and it's a travel story, and more than anything, I think it's just a really good story about relationships, and I have always just really loved it. So every, few years I will reread it. And today I would like to read you the first chapter, because I think it is one of the most wonderful first chapters of any book that I have ever read. I don't know why, it just really affected me. I just thought it was wonderful when I first read it, and so I want to share it with you. So this is Chapter 1 of Midnight Hour Encores by Bruce Brooks. When I was 9, suddenly all the other girls in the 4th grade were horse freaks. They sat around in class with their hands curved over the tops of their desks, so the teacher couldn't see they were drawing deformed stallions on the backs of their spelling tests and lettering sweaty names like Stormy and Flicker on their notebooks. It would have been bad enough if they were writing boys' names. Boys I could have understood. I knew that someday we were all supposed to get into boys. But horses? Nobody I knew had grown up to marry a horse. I tried to consider liking horses. I even tried to draw a horse myself after reading about them in a couple of my encyclopedias. But I stopped after the first foot. Horses run on what really is one of their toes. It hurt too much just to think about it. I decided the reason I wasn't fascinated with horses might be that I had never seen one. I already knew the girls in my class didn't own horses, but at least a few of them had seen them somewhere. So I did what I sometimes do when one of my investigations hits a gap. I asked Taxi, "What would your father do if you asked him to show you some horses?" He'd say, "Sure, honey," and put down his newspaper or book or TV guide and get you into the car for a 20-minute drive into the nearby country for a peek at a few of the animals in a local stable. If you lived in Washington, D.C. like us, your dad wouldn't even have to drive 20 minutes because there are stables in Rock Creek Park right in the middle of town. "There, sweetie pie," your dad would say, waving his arm at a barn or a circled fence inside which a bunch of the things snorted and tiptoed and shivered. "There's some horses." But my father is a little different. Yes, he put down his book. Yes, he said, "Sure, honey," and got me into the car. Yes, he started driving toward the country. But he didn't stop for almost 6 hours, and when he did, it wasn't near a stable. It was in the middle of miles of sand dunes, where we cooked dinner over a fire and spent the night in a tent. When he woke me up before dawn the next morning, he didn't mention horses. He handed me a cup of coffee in the dark and waited while I drank it and ate an apple. Then, in complete silence, he led me on a stumbly climb across 1,000 sand dunes as the sky got less black. We stopped suddenly, 10 feet from the top of one dune. The sky got lighter at the edges, turning as pink as somebody's gums. Taxi didn't say anything except to ask if I was cold and offer me his sweater, which I took, also without saying anything. Then all of a sudden he cocked his head and beckoned me, and we climbed with him in the lead. He turned and pushed me up ahead for the last couple of steps. And then, zing! I was standing on the very top edge of a straight fall 60-foot sand dune, looking across half a mile of pale beach dotted with pools at the ocean, which somehow I didn't expect, even with all that sand. The sun was just untucking itself over the sea off in the distance, and the sky was turning pink and yellow. There was a breeze, thick and warm, and I have just completely forgotten about horses because it's pretty nice out there, and who cares about short-haired animals that run on single toes? Taxi cares. That's who. Taxi cares about anything you ask him about. Put him in motion, and you can't just turn him off. He sets things up so well sometimes, you'd think he controls everything, but he really doesn't. He set this one up perfectly, though, because just as I am doing my city girl marvels at nature routine, I suddenly notice that the pounding of the surf is getting louder from a specific direction, the way a secondary theme sneaks into melody from the violas in an orchestra. And when I look in that direction, off to my left, instead of surf, I see a sudden wild spray of beautiful monsters from Mars swirl out from behind a dune, gracefully rolling toward me, not snorting or shivering, but just running on the flat beach beneath me, splashing in the edges of the tide, and emptying those little pools with a single stroke of a hoof. Taxi doesn't have to wave his hand and say, "There, sweetie pie, there's some horses." He stands behind me, so quietly I don't even know he's there, watching while the herd runs by and runs away, down the empty beach without losing speed, until all I can see is an occasional sparkle in the growing sunlight when one of them smashes a pool. I stare for a few minutes. After a while, Taxi's hand lands on my forearm like a confident little bird, and I turn, and he leads me back to the car. We don't say anything, really. I sleep all the way home. The next day I went to school, and when I watched the Hillarys and Jennifers write "Stormy" so urgently, I felt even further away from them than ever. But it wasn't Taxi's fault. I asked him to show me something, and he did. And this whole story is just to demonstrate why I only ask him to show me things that seem important. He doesn't fool around, and he doesn't give up, and he doesn't let go, even when you would just as soon skip the inquiry midway through. 3 days ago, I asked him to show me my mother. So, Chapter 1 of Midnight Hour Encores by Bruce Brooks. So if that tantalizes you, I would encourage you to check out this book. I just think that is a very cool story and a very cool way to set the framework for that relationship. And she calls her father Taxi because his first name is Cabot, And at some point when she was young, she made the connection between cab and taxi and started calling him Taxi. So, like I said, there are just some wonderful relationships and wonderful conversations in this book, and I recommend it as a young adult novel that still holds up, even though, you know, when you read it now, it's like, oh, there's no cell phones and no internet, and she's talking about looking up things in her encyclopedia, and so, you know, there's a certain sweet nostalgia to that as well. So that is my first comfort book, Midnight Hour Encores by Bruce Brooks. Okay, so the second book I have is a book of poetry, and I just love this book because of the sound of the book. And it's funny, I bought this before I was doing ASMR. I might have been listening to ASMR, I can't remember, but I was on holiday in Dublin, and I bought this book at the Gutter Bookshop, which is a fantastic bookstore there. And one of the reasons I bought it was because I picked it up and I was just like, ooh, this texture, and the sound and the feel of it, I just really liked it. I liked it in a tactile way, as well as for the content.